In the spring of 1847, a surveyor named Duncan MacLeod stood at the eastern edge of the Isle of Coll, watching 3 horses struggle to pull a loaded cart through mud that reached their knees. The cart carried 840 pounds of kelp harvested from the shores, bound for the island's processing station 2 miles inland. The horses had been pulling for 47 minutes. They had covered 300 yards. MacLeod was 34 years old, appointed by the Commissioners of Highland Roads and Bridges to assess transportation infrastructure across the Inner Hebrides. He had inspected 23 islands in 14 months. He had never seen anything like Coll. The island measured 13 miles long and 3 miles wide at its broadest point, lying 8 miles west of the Isle of Mull in the Atlantic waters off Yakoua, Scotland's western coast. Population in 1841, 1,442 souls. Arable land, approximately 2,100 acres scattered in pockets between rocky outcrops and peat bogs. The rest was moorland, bog, and stone. The island had been inhabited for at least 5,000 years. Archaeological evidence showed Bronze Age settlements, Iron Age forts, Viking occupation. People had lived there, farmed there, fished there, died there for millennia. But in 1847, the island had exactly 4 miles of what anyone might charitably call a road, and even those 4 miles existed only because carts had worn ruts deep enough that the ruts themselves became the path. MacLeod's assignment was straightforward. The Highland potato famine had struck 3 years earlier. The British government, embarrassed by the catastrophe unfolding in Ireland and terrified of similar collapse in the Scottish Highlands, had allocated funds for infrastructure improvements. Roads meant commerce. Commerce meant food security. Food security meant fewer starving Highlanders making their way to Glasgow or Liverpool or worse, igniting political unrest. MacLeod's job was to determine where roads should be built, how much they would cost, and whether the investment made economic sense. He had spent 6 days on Coll. He had walked from Arinagur, the main settlement on the island's western coast, time 300 nis to Sorrisdale in the north, to Arnabost in the east. He had measured distances, counted buildings, interviewed farmers and fishermen and kelp harvesters. He had inspected the island's 2 main employers, the Duke of Argyll's estate, which owned most of the land, and the kelp industry, which provided cash income to crofters who would otherwise survive on subsistence agriculture alone. Kelp, seaweed harvested from the shore, dried, burned, and processed into ash used in soap and glass manufacturing, had been Coll's economic lifeline since the 1780s. At its peak, Coll produced 240 tons of kelp ash annually, worth approximately 3,600 times 300 years. A fortune in an economy where a laborer earned 8 shillings per week. But kelp required transportation. Harvested wet seaweed weighed approximately 8 pounds per cubic foot. After drying, it weighed 2 pounds per cubic foot, but the volume remained unchanged. A standard cart pulled by 2 horses could carry roughly 800 to 1,000 pounds of dried kelp. That same cart, attempting to transport wet seaweed, could manage perhaps 600 pounds before the weight became unmanageable. The kelp stations, the kilns where seaweed was burned to produce ash, were located inland to protect them from salt spray and storm damage. The seaweed was harvested along 26 miles of coastline. It had to get from shore to kiln, time to 450 ms. And therein lay Coll's problem. The island's terrain made conventional road construction nearly impossible. Coll sat on a foundation of Louisian gneiss, some of the oldest rock on Earth, formed approximately 2.7 billion years ago. The gneiss created a landscape of knobs and hollows, resistant bedrock jutting through thin soil. Where the gneiss didn't dominate, peat bogs did. Coll's interior was a maze of waterlogged ground, some bogs measuring 6 feet deep, accumulated plant matter decomposing over 10,000 years since the last ice age retreated. Between the rock and the bog lay the island's arable land, small fields enclosed by stone walls, patches of productivity wrested from hostile geology through centuries of backbreaking labor. A conventional road, built to the standards MacLeod had seen on the mainland, required a foundation of crushed stone, a cambered surface for drainage, ditches on both sides to channel water away from the roadbed, and a width of at least 16 feet to allow 2 carts to pass. Building such a road across Coll would require blasting through gneiss outcrops, draining or bridging peat bogs, and importing thousands of tons of crushed stone from the mainland, because Coll's gneiss, while ancient and hard, fractured unpredictably and made poor road material. MacLeod estimated the cost at 87 $87 per mile. For a comprehensive road network connecting the island's settlements and kelp stations, perhaps 15 miles of road total, the cost would exceed $1,300. The island's annual economic output was perhaps £5,000. The return on investment looked grim. MacLeod interviewed James McLean, factor for the Duke of Argyll's estate, on his 4th day on the island. McLean was 52 years old, had managed the Coll estate for 19 years, and understood the island's economy better than any man alive. They met in McLean's office in Arinagur, a stone building near the harbor where the monthly supply boat from Tobermory docked. McLean had records, ledgers showing kelp production since 1823, rent rolls listing every tenant and cotter, harvest yields for barley and potatoes, population figures, emigration numbers, 142 people, had left Coll for Canada in the past 4 years, driven by famine and desperation. "The island cannot afford your roads," McLean said. He spoke with the flat certainty of a man who had balanced accounts for 2 decades. "The Duke will not pay for them, the government grant will not cover them, and the tenants are barely surviving. You've seen the potato fields." MacLeod had seen them, blighted, blackened stalks rotting in the ground. The 1846 harvest had failed almost completely. The 1847 crop looked no better. "Then how do you move the kelp?" MacLeod asked. "We don't move it," McLean said. "We bring the kilns to the kelp." MacLeod stared at him. "You move the kilns?" "No, we build kilns where the kelp is harvested, 23 kilns around the coast. The Crofters harvest, dry, and burn the seaweed on the shore. They transport the ash, not the weed. A cart of kelp ash weighs 300 pounds and is worth $15. A cart of dried kelp weighs 800 pounds and is worth $3. The arithmetic is simple." It was simple, but it didn't solve the transportation problem entirely. Kelp ash still needed to reach Arinagur for shipment to the mainland. Barley and potatoes still needed to reach the mill and the market. People still needed to move between settlements for marriages, funerals, markets, church. Coll needed roads, just not the roads MacLeod was used to building. "Show me how you actually move goods on this island," MacLeod said. The next morning, McLean took him to Arnabost, a settlement on the eastern shore. They met Donald McKinnon, a crofter who farmed 4 acres of barley and worked the kelp harvest 6 months per year. McKinnon owned a cart, a simple wooden frame on 2 wheels, iron-rimmed, pulled by a single Highland pony named Seumas. The cart's crucial feature was its width, 39 inches between the wheels, not 40 inches, not 42 inches. Exactly, 39 inches. "Why 39 inches?" MacLeod asked. "Because that's what fits," McKinnon said. He demonstrated. The path from Arnabost to the nearest kelp kiln, a distance of approximately 1,200 yards, wound through broken ground studded with gneiss outcrops. The path wasn't straight. It curved around rocks too large to move and too hard to break. It dipped through hollows where centuries of rain had eroded channels in the thin soil. It rose over low ridges of exposed bedrock. But wherever the path went, its width remained constant, 42 inches. just wide enough for McKinnon's cart, with 1.5 inches of clearance on each side. The path had been worn into the landscape by generations of carts following the same track. The wheels had cut ruts into the soil where soil existed. Where bedrock lay exposed, the wheels had polished the stone smooth, creating shallow grooves that guided the cart wheels like rails. Where the path crossed boggy ground, previous users had laid stones in the ruts, creating a makeshift pavement that prevented the wheels from sinking. The stones weren't mortared or fitted carefully. They were simply placed in the wheel tracks, held in position by the weight of passing carts. "This path has been here longer than my grandfather," McKinnon said. "Maybe longer than his grandfather. We maintain it. We add stones where the bog gets soft. We clear debris after storms. But we don't build it. It builds itself." McLeod walked the path. He measured it at intervals. The width varied by no more than 6 inches along its entire length. The path found the easiest route through impassable terrain, threading between obstacles, seeking the line of least resistance. It was organic, evolutionary, a path shaped by necessity over centuries. And that path, McLeod realized, was Coll's road system. He spent his final 2 days on the island walking every path that connected settlements to fields, fields to kilns, kilns to Arinagur. He found 47 distinct paths ranging in length from 200 yards to nearly 3 miles. Every path shared the same characteristics: width between 39 and 43 inches, following terrain contours, maintained by users rather than constructed by authority. The paths formed a network far more extensive than any road system McLeod could build with his allocated budget. The network existed because it had to exist, and it had evolved to match the only vehicles that could navigate Coll's landscape: single pony carts with 39-inch wheelbases. The carts themselves had standardized not through regulation but through survival. A cart wider than 42 inches couldn't navigate the paths. A cart narrower than 36 inches became unstable on uneven ground. The optimal width, time of 300 miles determined by trial and error over generations, was 39 inches. Every cartwright on Coll built to that specification, not because anyone told them to, but because carts built to other dimensions didn't work. McLeod returned to the mainland in late May 1847. He submitted his report to the commissioners in June. His recommendation was unprecedented. Instead of building new roads on Coll, the government should formally recognize the existing path network and allocate funds for its maintenance and improvement. He proposed spending £240 to improve drainage on 12 critical paths, to lay stone pavement in boggy sections, and to widen 3 particularly narrow passages where carts sometimes became stuck. He argued that Coll's organic transportation system, though unconventional, was more efficient and more sustainable than any road network that could be built within budgetary constraints. The commissioners rejected his recommendation. They found it absurd that a professional surveyor would endorse cart paths as roads. They allocated £150 to Coll for road construction and told McLeod to design a proper road from Arinagur to Arnabost, a distance of 4.2 miles, which could be built for approximately $365 if materials were sourced carefully and labor kept cheap. McLeod resigned from the commission in August 1847. He took a position with a private estate in Argyllshire and never worked on another government infrastructure project. The road from Arinagur to Arnabost was designed by his replacement, a surveyor named William Grant, who had never visited Coll. Construction began in 1848 using destitution relief labor. Famine victims paid 8 pence per day to work on the road as an alternative to starvation. The road was completed in 1851 at a final cost of $520, $155 over budget. The road was 14 feet wide, built to mainland standards, with drainage ditches and a foundation of imported crushed stone. It ran straight where McLeod's recommended paths curved, requiring the excavation of gneiss outcrops and the filling of boggy hollows. Within 3 years, erosion had undermined the roadbed in 7 places. The drainage ditches filled with peat and debris. The crushed stone foundation, subjected to Coll's brutal Atlantic weather, fragmented and sank into the underlying bog. By 1860, the road was impassable for 4 months per year during the wettest season. Carts avoided it, returning to the old paths that Grant's Road had been built to replace. The kelp industry collapsed in the 1860s when industrial processes for producing soda ash made kelp burning economically unviable. Coll's population fell to 867 by 1871. The Duke of Argyll sold the estate in 1869. The new owners had no interest in maintaining expensive roads for a declining population. Grant's Road, already deteriorating, received no maintenance after 1872. Nature reclaimed it. Peat bogs expanded over the roadbed. Heather and grass covered the crushed stone. By 1900, only fragments remained visible, straight sections that ran counter to the landscape's logic, evidence of an engineering philosophy that had ignored the wisdom embedded in Coll's ancient paths. The paths themselves endured. Coll's population stabilized at around 150 to 200 people through the early 20th century. Crofters continued farming. Fishermen continued fishing. And carts continued following the routes their predecessors had established, maintaining the network through use. The paths required no formal maintenance. Users added stones where erosion threatened. They cleared blockages after storms. The system sustained itself because it aligned with the island's economic reality and geological constraints. In 1965, time 300 miles, the Isle of Coll received its first motorized vehicle, a Land Rover purchased by the island's doctor. The vehicle could not navigate the cart paths. It could barely navigate what remained of Grant's 1851 road. The doctor lobbied for proper road construction. The Argyll County Council, facing pressure from Coll and similar islands, allocated funds for a modern road network. Construction began in 1967. The new roads followed many of the ancient cart paths, widened and paved but retaining the organic routes that had proven themselves over centuries. Engineers in 1967 had better equipment than Grant's laborers in 1848, but they faced the same geological constraints. The new roads curved around gneiss outcrops they followed. Terrain contours. They bridged bogs rather than filling them. They looked in many places like paved versions of the paths McLeod had documented 120 years earlier. The carts had been right all along. Duncan McLeod died in 1873 at age 60, having spent his final years managing drainage projects for an estate in Loch Gilfed. He never returned to Coll. His report, filed with the Highland Roads and Bridges Commission in 1847, gathered dust in Edinburgh archives until a transportation historian discovered it in 1983 while researching 19th-century infrastructure development. The report became a case study in what planners call desire paths, routes created by users rather than designers, shaped by actual need rather than theoretical efficiency. Coll's cart paths demonstrated a principle that formal engineering often ignores. Infrastructure should adapt to its environment and its users, not force the environment and users to adapt to predetermined standards. The paths worked because they accepted constraints rather than fighting them. They evolved incrementally, tested by use, refined by necessity. They required minimal investment because they emerged from collective practice rather than centralized planning. And they survived because they were resilient, maintained by everyone who used them, dependent on no single authority or funding source. Today, Coll's population hovers around 200. The island has 12 miles of paved road, most following routes, established by centuries of cart traffic. Tourists arrive on the ferry from Oban, drive rental cars along roads that wind through the landscape in patterns that make no sense until you remember the nice outcrops and peat bogs that shape them. The old paths are mostly gone, overgrown or paved over, but their logic persists. The island still builds where carts could fit, because the carts understood something engineers took generations to learn. The land decides the route, not the surveyor's straight edge. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about small islands and stubborn carts and roads that built themselves. Real places. Real ingenuity. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if your ancestors came from the Highlands. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Duncan MacLeod and the Crofters of Coll don't disappear into silence. These people deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.